Everything you think you know about why the American dollar is powerful is probably incomplete. The story most people have absorbed through economics classes, through financial journalism, through the general cultural assumption that America's currency dominates global trade because America has the world's largest economy, contains real elements. The United States does have the world's largest economy. Its financial markets are the deepest and most liquid on Earth. Its institutions, however imperfect, have a track record that most alternatives cannot match. These things are true. They are not the primary reason the dollar has held reserve currency status for 80 years. The primary reason is a deal, a specific, negotiated geopolitical arrangement that was made in secret in 1974 between the Nixon and Ford administrations and the government of Saudi Arabia. A deal that most Americans have never heard of, that created 50 years of financial privilege that no other country has ever enjoyed, and that is being quietly dismantled right now, transaction by transaction, currency by currency, in ways whose consequences for the purchasing power of your savings have never been honestly explained to you. To understand what the deal created, you need to understand what preceded it. In 1944, at a resort hotel in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, the finance ministers and central bank governors of the Allied nations gathered to design the monetary system that would govern the post-war world. The agreement they reached was straightforward in its architecture. The US dollar would be the world's reserve currency. Every other currency would maintain a fixed exchange rate to the dollar, and the dollar itself would be convertible to gold at a fixed rate, $35 per ounce. This system worked because it was credible. Countries that held dollars were holding something backed by a physical asset. America had the gold. The dollar was the claim. The system gave the dollar its authority. By the late 1960s, the arrangement was under strain. The United States was financing a war in Vietnam and simultaneously expanding its domestic social programs, the Great Society legislation that created Medicare, Medicaid, and expanded federal education and housing programs. The combined cost was exceeding what the economy could sustain without expanding the money supply beyond what its gold reserves could support. Foreign governments, holding dollars accumulated through trade surpluses, began exercising their right to convert those dollars into gold. France, under Charles de Gaulle, was particularly aggressive in this conversion, viewing the dollar's reserve status as an expression of American imperialism that entitled the United States to spend money it did not have at the expense of its trading partners. By the summer of 1971, the gold reserves at Fort Knox were depleting at a rate that could not be sustained for more than a few more months. On a Sunday evening in August, Nixon addressed the nation and announced, without prior international consultation, that the United States was suspending dollar-to-gold convertibility. The Bretton Woods system ended that night. The dollar lost its foundational backing. And the most urgent economic question of the early 1970s became, what would replace it? The answer was oil. In agreements concluded between the Nixon and Ford administrations and the Saudi government in 1973 and 1974, the United States secured a commitment of extraordinary consequence. Saudi Arabia would price and sell its oil exclusively in US dollars and would use its OPEC influence to ensure the cartel adopted the same convention. The petrodollar revenues would be recycled into US Treasury securities. In exchange, the United States committed to arms sales, security guarantees, and a Gulf military presence. The deal was transactional and bilateral. It was not the product of market forces. It was a bargain between two governments, one needing to finance deficit spending, one needing military protection. Neither population was consulted. The citizens of every country that would henceforth need dollars to buy oil were not informed. The consequences of this arrangement for the United States were structural and compounding, because every country on Earth that needed oil, which meant every industrialized economy, every developing economy seeking to industrialize, and every military force that ran on petroleum needed to first acquire US dollars. The global demand for dollars was permanently elevated, regardless of American economic performance. Countries accumulated dollar reserves. Those reserves were invested primarily in American financial assets, treasury bonds, equities, real estate, providing the United States with a permanent source of cheap financing. America could run trade deficits without the currency pressure that would have forced adjustment in any other country, because the dollar demand created by the petrodollar system continuously absorbed the supply generated by those deficits. The ability to run deficits at this scale, to consume more than the economy produced, to spend more than the government collected in taxes, to borrow from the future at rates that did not reflect the true cost of that borrowing, was the material expression of what the French economist Valéry Giscard d'Estaing had called the dollar's exorbitant privilege. The petrodollar system made that privilege structural rather than situational. It was baked into the architecture of global trade. The implicit cost of this arrangement was paid by every country and every individual that held dollar reserves. When the United States ran budget deficits, it issued new dollars. New dollars diluted the value of existing dollars. The countries holding dollar reserves, central banks, sovereign wealth funds, ordinary savers in countries where dollar-denominated savings were common, absorbed the purchasing power loss that would, in a normal monetary system, have fallen on the country doing the deficit spending. This was a continuous, invisible, and never acknowledged transfer of value from dollar holders globally to the American economy. It happened every year for 50 years. It was never voted on. It was never disclosed. It was the hidden subsidy embedded in the architecture of the global monetary system, available only to the country whose currency sat at its center. In March 2023, Saudi Arabia completed the first oil transaction settled in Chinese yuan since the petrodollar arrangement was established. The transaction was small in absolute terms. Its significance was not in the volume, but in the symbolism and the precedent, that the country whose agreement had created the system was now willing to transact outside it. In 2024, BRICS nations announced expanded use of local currencies for bilateral trade settlement. By 2025, the share of global trade settled in US dollars had fallen below 50% for the first time in recorded history. The dollar remained the world's largest reserve currency. Its margin of dominance was narrowing in a way that is measurable and directional. The consequence for ordinary savers is not hypothetical. The structural dollar demand created by the petrodollar system suppressed American inflation by allowing deficit spending to be financed at artificially low rates. As that structural demand weakens, the suppression weakens with it. American deficits become more expensive to finance. The dollar's purchasing power faces pressures it has been structurally insulated from for 50 years. Pressures that arrive gradually, then persistently, in the form of costs that are higher than they should be. The people whose savings are denominated in dollars, whose financial plans were built around assumptions of stability that rested on an arrangement most of them never knew existed, will absorb whatever adjustment is required when that arrangement is no longer fully operational. The dollar's decline from reserve currency dominance will not announce itself with a single dramatic event. It will accumulate in the cost of goods, in the interest rates governments must offer to attract buyers for their debt, in the slow erosion of purchasing power in savings accounts that nobody has told you are exposed to a structural risk they never knew existed. Follow now. This channel covers the financial architecture that operates beneath the economy you can see, the mechanisms that have governed your money for 50 years without being explained. Follow so you do not miss what comes next.